Welcome to the family. Welcome back to the family. So what we're doing is really looking into the survey questions that we put out, and we're taking your input. So thank you guys for watching Three Docs on the Mic so far. The next topic we're going to talk about today is valuing others. When we talk about value and others, I just want to first just see, what does it mean to value someone? So if you can just start with that definition on how you sort of look, or what's your perspective on putting value on someone else. Let's start with Dr. Riaja.
Thank you for the question. So when I think about value, I think about things that I cherish, that I respect, that I want to have in my life. Specifically with people, I think it's important that they know that they are valued. And I'm not sure if you're going to go into that a little later, what that looks like. But definitely, I just think respect is important and understanding is important when we're talking about valuing people.
Right. So we talk about respect and just understand, having people know that they're valued, right? They understand what value means to you. So that's pretty good, Dr. Riaja. Dr. Kamoya, so what does value mean to you when you hear that?
That's one of those big words for me too. I can go in so many different directions just around value. I think when I first think about value, I think about worth. And if I'm thinking about that from a humanistic standpoint, then for me it's do I feel like this person is worthy of my time, my respect, all of these things. And I've not encountered a human yet that I do not think is worthy. I think that we all have pluses and minuses, or positives and struggles, strengths and struggles as human beings, and we're all trying to navigate life. And so when I think about value for a human being, I have to say that I value everyone. I value everyone's lived experience. I value everyone's perspective. I may not agree with it, but I think that their perspective and their lived experience is in my life. Like, they're coming in my life for a reason. And what value, what do I need to learn and grow from that? And so when I think about value, I think about growth. I think about learning. I think about what does it mean for me, right? As I'm interacting with another person, what am I getting out of it? What am I giving to them? That reciprocal process, again, sharing that energy. What does that look like for us?
So you mentioned that word worth, right? And worth, is someone worthy of your time and your talent and your energy, right? So the value, and then you said that you place value on people, and you value the value that you have with your community, the people around you, is not only that value that you perceive, but it may be unintentional value, the value that they're bringing into you that you didn't know that you had that or needed that value aspect brought into it. So I concur with both of you guys, meaning that it is value, it is that time, that respect, that ability to care for someone. And value is sort of tough for me, because it's, okay, how do I value something? You have a possession and you value it. That means that you pay attention to it. That means that you cherish it. That means that you nurture it. That means that you care for it. And those things that you don't place value on are those things that you just let go. And you let it like fend for itself, and you let it do that. And that's a struggle for me, because just because I'm not giving that attention to that, I don't feel like I don't value them. So I don't know if I would say that I value others, um, or let me say, my measure of value does not always look the same, meaning that my attention and respect and care that I give to something, the level of that does not mean or diminish the value of the person to me. So that's a little tricky for me with that value thing. And then just by going through that, right, and trying to distinguish and delineate what value means in people and what value means in others, can you give an example of a time where you did not feel valued? And can you give an example of a time when you did not value a person, or you didn't feel that you showed them the proper value or respect with that person? Let's start with Dr. Kamoya.
Those are very good questions. I think I'm going to start with my behavior, only because it's easier for me to recollect, because I'm always in reflection. So it's easier for me to recollect my behavior, or what I thought about my behavior. And so I worked in service of young people and families for many years, over 25 years. There was a time where, before I learned about restorative justice, before I learned about self, and I was on my self-work journey, there was a lot of things that I would let affect me and inundate me and affect my behavior and how I chose to show up. And so there was this one interaction with this young person who was 14, a 14-year-old. For some reason, 13 and 14-year-olds bring you right back to middle school, and you start having that middle school behavior. And so this young person graduated from middle school, and it was actually a freshman in high school. And as an alumni, there was a certain time where they could not actually be on campus unless they were a current student, and that was for the current student safety. Within that area, there was a lot of unsafe behaviors happening in that area, and so that was for the current student safety. But after a certain time, they were more than welcome to come on campus. Play. There was a huge field there, so they would play soccer, play basketball, baseball, whatever, kickball, whatever, just hang out on campus. And so I asked that young person to leave, and we didn't have a bad relationship when that young person was in middle school, but we didn't have an intentional relationship. So we never actually we never built relationship, should I say, but we were in relationship. And when I asked that young person to leave, that young person called me a name that took me like 0 to 100. I went right back to middle school, and my behavior was unacceptable. And I think I'm bringing up that scenario as it relates to value, because I didn't value what that young person was actually trying to convey to me, to help me be a better person, to be a better model, a role model, to be a better adult in that moment. I really made it about me, and I couldn't see, okay, what is this young person trying to teach me in this moment? And so that's just one. I'm still blanking on a time where I'm sure there was plenty of times where I didn't feel valued, but those things I actually tend to process and let go of. I don't let them inundate my life, because if I did, I'd be weighed down all the time. And so those things I process. If it really bothers me, I'll process with somebody else. I may process with another person, but then I'm able to move on. I'm able to forgive. I'm able to not forget, but forgive. Again, what's the value? What's the skill? What's the learning in that interaction? And how do I move on? How do I move past it? And hopefully deter me from ever being in that situation again. And so I can't recall.
Yeah. I like that you don't make that a big point in your life, those low points and things like that. So that's pretty cool. So Dr. Riaja, can you think of an example of when you did not feel valued, and then additionally, and either or, because it doesn't have to be both if you can't think of one, but when you did not value someone else?
And I actually would like to add something before I respond to your question about valuing others or not feeling valued. I also think value is important with self-value. because really it always starts with how you relate to self. So like, if you're not valuing yourself, are you being 100% able to value others? So that's just something that I was thinking about that's really important, because it shows up in relationship with others. You know, whatever you think about yourself will show up in relationship with others. And that can be intentional or unintentional. Sometimes it's like you don't even realize that it's showing up in other relationships, but it truly is showing up. So self-value is just as important as valuing others. And I would say it's the building block for valuing others. So now segue into answering your question. I think what stands out for me, it's not necessarily one moment, but it's a pattern of behavior that I had specifically in my 20s. I don't remember doing it like in prior to that, but in my 20s, I was so quick to cut people off. Like, if you did something that I felt was just out of line, bye. I used to say that I have the gift of goodbye. And now that I look back, I was like, I should not have, like, you know, put so much onto my ability to dismiss people from my life. Now that I'm much older, I know that I was absolutely wrong in situations where I was just so quick to cut people off. So with that being said, I wasn't valuing those relationships or that person, because that person in those moments, kind of like what Kamoya said, in those, you know, moments of conflict or moments of abrasiveness, you know, you can learn something. And I wasn't choosing to learn in that moment. I was choosing to say goodbye and move on. So that's my example.
Okay. Yeah, that quick to say goodbye, right? That gift of bye, goodbye. I like that. But yeah, so it does take sort of a realization and maturity, right? It takes time for us to grow into who we are now, and that's great. And that's the beauty of being on this journey of life, is that you can grow and you can change. Your 20s should not look like your 30s, and your 30s shouldn't look like your 40s, right? And your 40s shouldn't look like your 50s. And by the time you're 60 and 70, you just all on, right? So this is just amazing at that point, right? So I have several examples, but I'm trying to pinpoint one in my head. I'll start with when I didn't value someone. And similar to yours and Dr. Kamoya's, was that it was when I first started teaching. I think it was in higher education, I believe, I believe it was more in higher education than it was in K-12, but it was the content area, right? So chemistry is a difficult subject to grapple with for a lot of people. And I was just into, oh my gosh, I have to get the content. I have to get the content. You know, they have to understand this because they have to take the test, and they can't just, I don't have time for everything else. And in me not taking the time for the everything else is the students, they felt devalued. And it took them to tell me that they didn't feel like they had value for me to recognize it. So then I had to stop and I had to say, okay, they have opinions, they have insight, they have knowledge I don't have. And I really had to start to appreciate their input into the entire lecture series and making sure that they understood at their level. I always say that help is only help when it's the help you need. So my idea of what they needed was not what they needed. So they had to retrain me in order to see the value in what they have and what they bring to the table. And that totally transformed how I interact with the class, because now I'm like, they have life experiences. They bring so much value into this relationship. and I need to take the time to learn their value. So it's not just textbook anymore. It's more that building that relationship, building that the symbiotic relationship that goes on in education, right? It's both, it's a two-way street. They learn from me and I learn from them. And that's the only way they're going to grow. And that's the only way we're going to make the next generation be great. And then fast forward a little bit more is a time when I felt devalued. So I have, I'm thinking of a instance where it's it's already a hierarchy level in education. And sometimes there's the ones that go the immediate, and then you have those that are a little bit further and further away from you. But the devaluing is that any idea that I would come to the table with was either confronted with just, I don't even know what to say for the word, it was just a lot of angry and just angst and just total disregard for my opinion or what I'm trying to give to the growth of the situation. And it's really interesting because similar to what I learned from the students, right? So if I can tell you that you are devaluing me or devaluing a group of people, then I'm thinking that, okay, you now see, okay, maybe I need to change. But when you express that, and you and others have expressed that, and they still do the same thing, repeated behavior, now it's the entire just culture of the institution, or the culture of the community is just down, and we're all devalued. So if one is hurting, then all of us are hurting. So we have to really stop and say, okay, if this is how one is feeling, why is that? What is my role in making these people feel devalued, or that they just don't have value at all? Because there's a difference in placing a value on them and then lessening it. But if you never place the value on them, that's even worse than, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to call that, right? So, so there's instances and times in our lives where we come across things that really make us stop to think. And I feel that now all of these instances culminate into me being a better person, meaning that I'm going to find value. Similar to what Dr. Kamoya was saying, is that, okay, every relationship, there is value. I have to pull that value out, right? So the last question that I want to ask you guys is, what do you do, or what can you say to a person who feels devalued? Or how can you bolster their value? Only, like Dr. Riaja said, their self-value, but also how others perceive them. What can you do? What are some tools that we can use? Dr. Riaja.
So one of the things that I think is really important is actually expressing in words how you value a person. It doesn't have to be, I value you, you know, you don't have to say it like that, but definitely just expressing how much you appreciate them, and whatever it is that you notice that they contribute in some way, just acknowledging it, kind of like what you said, Dr. Sophronia, when you bring something to the table and it's not being acknowledged, it's actually being, you know, pushed away or devalued in some way. So just allowing people to verbally hear what it is that you have to say. But also another way to value people is in the way that they receive. So different people receive things in different ways. You know, the whole thing about do people like quality time or words of affirmation or things like that. So sometimes people don't necessarily want to hear your words. They want to see it in your behavior. Or is your behavior aligning with your professed value in that person? You know, are you acting in such a way that is congruent with what you're saying? Or is it incongruent. So we have to make sure that our behavior is lining up with our words. So I think that that's very important.
Well, thank you, Dr. Riaja, just for giving that to us. And it's in words of affirmation. And then there's also that action piece that we're looking for, or people are looking for, to show value in themselves. So Dr. Kamoya, can you give us some tools on how we can increase value of others around us?
One of the things that comes to me is something that we do in restorative justice. Well, two things first and foremost. The first one is we actually use values in our circles. And values, we ask what's important to you, or what attributes help you be your best self. And so having people reflect on that before they go outside, what are the thoughts? What do you think about yourself? What helps you be your best self? So self-accountability, because oftentimes people are like, well, they made me. Well, no, nobody really can make you. I mean, there are some incidents where that can happen. So I'm not gonna dismiss that. But in most cases, we actually have the power. We just gave up that power to another person in that moment for whatever reason. And so really thinking about self, what helps you be your best self? And having them write down and reflect on that. And then what are you asking from others? And so when you're talking about what are you asking from others, you're asking somebody, hey, I feel like this, and this is what I need you, because we're in community, we're in relationship. This is what I need from you to help me be my best self. Help me, right? Work with us, work with me, so that I can show up as my best self. You can show up as your best self. We can show up as our best selves. The other thing that comes to me is just something that I use in supervision. So as a supervisor, it's just, I think about skill or will. And so is it skill that needs to happen for this other person? Like, do I need to model this? Do I need to intentionally have a conversation around skill? Or is it will? Do they just don't want to do it? And so hearing you, Dr. Zafronia, I was thinking about implicit and explicit behaviors, right? And so implicit means that you're unconscious, but when somebody tells you and brings it to your consciousness and you're still choosing to do that behavior, now that's will. You don't want to change. That is implicit. You are showing up that way. You do not want to change. And so there's different ways of approaching both of those things. Both, I believe, require a conversation, but that conversation could look very different, right? Depending on the situation. And so those are two things that I think about. And those are two things that I actually ask others to think about. Well, do you think it's skill or will? Even in self-reflection, well, is it skill or will? Do I not want to do this, or do I not have the knowledge to actually do this? And then when I discern that, or in conversation with somebody else and they help me discern, now I know which avenue to take.
And that's really good too, is that first defining your values, right? And know what's important for you in order to show up, but then also making that determination when you're trying to help someone be their best self, to raise their value in society, right? Or in this social construct that we're in. Is it skill or is it will? Because if they don't want to be better, then we have to allow them to have that choice, that you don't want to be better. But if it is that you're trying to be better, you just don't have the skill set to do it, then yeah, then we can work through that as well. So my tools or some techniques that I try to use on people just to make sure that they are, like Dr. Riaja said, just that affirmation, like, thank you so much, you are so appreciated. Like, I truly appreciate everything that you've done in order for us to get things done here today, so that, and then it has to be that behavioral change as well, because I look back when I was speaking about the students, if I didn't change my behavior, then I would have went the entire term with this whole class not responding, not engaging, just being very distant. And that was not something that I was used to in community. So I had to rebuild and refocus on what I wanted that community to look like. And in the community, I wanted everybody to feel valued. So that was really good for me, because now I take that into other things. Like, okay, if I'm walking into this space, I want everybody to feel empowered to be who they are. And I cannot devalue them without even any inclination, not even knowing them, not even a conversation before, right? That's not my place to devalue you, My place is just to make sure that you have all the tools you need in order for you to be the best self that you can be. So thank you so much, ladies. This has been a great conversation. So we are definitely looking forward to your comments on this episode. How do you value others? And then we'll go back to what Dr. Riaja said. What is your self-values? And Dr. Kamoya said that too, right? You want to define what your self-values are first. And then you can sort of ascertain how your values now impact your community. I know we talked about relationships in another episode, in a previous episode, and those value systems that you have, they come up in relationships. And we just have to figure out how to do that dance that Dr. Kamoy was talking about, right? How our values balance out in the relationships. So thank you so much for joining us for another 3 Docs and a Mic. And we just always want to remind you to proceed in power.
Thank you for being with us. We're sending you love, light, and positive energy. And remember to proceed in power.